Hey guys, welcome to this demo on characters and perspective. So before I get into characters, I need to start off by talking about perspective. And the first thing I want to talk about is kind of an understanding of how to use the horizon line. And for me, if I have a line, if it's like this, I can kind of track it back if it's on the screen to a point like this and create my box out of things. But what happens if that point, which it usually is somewhere way off the screen? Like let's say it's here. So I don't know where that point is headed off to. The trick for this is to think about where the line goes flat at the horizon line and to rotate it up through until it gets flat and continue that rotation in a smooth way like that and on up past the top of the horizon line. So when I'm drawing perspective, I typically don't draw the dots in. The way I think about it is I have a line and I do the same thing for this side. So if I draw this line, even though, yeah, I know there's a point there, but I just think about how does this rotate flat and then continue to rotate up. And I can create some nice boxes like that. Now I have my horizon line and I don't want to force myself to put everything in the same perspective. So for instance, let's put a box next to this box using a different perspective. So this one's going to be like this. And I'm just going to do that again. I'm going to kind of get a feel for when does it go flat at the horizon line. So we can see this one rotates a little more slowly. So I can create another box that way. Now, I've taken these lines and rotated them. So that means that this point is probably going to be a little farther over. And again, I just think about what that point is. And continue that. And I can put in as many. Now notice this, if I have a flat one, meaning it's parallel to the horizon line. Now this was slightly off, so I rotated up. But parallel, it's just going to go like that. And my point's going to be usually just right above it. These lines here, these vertical lines, as I get here, they're going to stay pretty up and down. So let's see, I'm using the same lines as these red ones here, so I'm going to use the same rotation for that one. But now as I get lower here, away from the horizon line, these vertical lines are going to start to, actually I'll do an even different one. Let's see, use green. So let's make it even more like this. So again, if I have one line, I can use a dot, or I could just think about how does that rotate up through that, and move this one. How does that rotate up through that? So like I mentioned, as I get lower down here, I'm going to start to see a little bit of a three-point perspective. Which means that these lines are going to start to converge. It's basically going to look like it's flat here, but then these start to come down as if there's a point. Those bottom lines, and same with the top, as you get higher up there, you're going to start to get these lines, vertical lines, are going to start to get some of that 3-point perspective. So that's how I quickly lay in perspective, and that's how I think about it. But let's take it a step farther and make it even simpler, because even that is kind of probably making your brain scratch. So here's the thing with drawing boxes. This is what I see most people do. They draw the first box line, they draw the second line, and most of you can already tell what I'm doing wrong here. This is called isometric perspective, and that means that all these lines are perfectly parallel. And that will happen with a certain type of flat lens, but that's not typically what we want, especially if we're doing storyboard drawings. What we want to do is, rather than these parallel lines, we want to radiate. And that's kind of what I was talking about when I was radiating up towards that horizon line. So what most people do, okay, so I'll take you from step one. This is what the first mistake is. People go, okay, radiate. And they radiate the top of the box only. They radiate those lines, okay. And then they radiate these lines. Okay, so I've got some perspective. But what they do, common mistake I see is then this third line becomes parallel. So this is another no-no. So 1, 2, third line. 1, 2, third line. And what you want to do is you want to take this and make sure that your perspective is continuing even down to that third line. So 1, 2, and see, I even did it naturally. You have to fight against it. Third. So now you have 1, 2. This third line is a big one. That one really needs to continue that rotation. And now you have a little star, proper box. And what I want you to do is just sit here and learn to draw these boxes where you're rotating all 3 lines. And you basically have 2 options. There's either this line's going to be flat, or there's going to be perspective. And of course, the third option is going to be you have 3-point perspective. So it's also going to be radiating this way. But again, if you built the top part of the box, remember, keep turning that so you get more perspective in that bottom. And once you have this down, you can really start getting into some pushing the figure into perspective. But you really want to get that first. So what I see people do is a lot of times when we have a storyboarding panel, we lay in some perspective. And here's the common mistake I see made. People are pretty good. They know, okay, 1-point perspective. They do this. Okay, it's rotating. But then, for some reason, people start making parallel lines after about 3 or 4. So that's a big no-no. So you want to learn to kind of fight that habit and force yourself. Pretend like, here's the way I do it. Pretend like you have a push pin stuck into this paper. And I have a piece of string tied to it. I'm going to pull it tight. Maybe I'll hang a rock from it. And I want to think about if I swung this thing around, this push pin, what would happen? Again, just like we were talking about, eventually it goes flat or flush at the horizon. So you want to swing your line up. Keep going, don't go, and then it becomes flat. And it actually, obviously continues up around. So if I'm building this, And this I'm going to call 1-point perspective. So again, avoid this where it starts getting parallel after a little while. Get used to this. But to me, this is kind of a boring type of perspective to lay down. So let's talk about what's another kind of perspective we could lay down. We could lay down 2-point perspective. If we have 2-point perspective, you have to make sure that both points are off the page. So again, if I have a line, I only need one line and I know what to do with the rest. I'm just rotating it until it goes flat at the horizon line, and then it continues up, right? And same thing here. If I have one line, I'm just rotating it till it goes flat. And now this is a little bit more interesting. The 2-point perspective. But for me, what I like to do if I'm storyboarding something is I like to do something in the middle, which I just call 1.5-point perspective. And it can be a little bit of a cheat, but basically I keep my 1 point kind of close to the edge here so that I have 1 point here. And again, swing it till it goes up through that. And then I use a 2-point for the other one. And technically it should have a little bit of a curve and it should get flat in front of that dot. But you can actually cheat it and just keep it straight. But this to me is kind of fun because it's just a nice setup, because over here I have this 2-point perspective, but then as I get over around here, I also have this really dynamic kind of 1-point perspective. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. So when I'm setting up a grid, I usually will just throw in a 1.5-point perspective. So that being said, let's say you're setting up a shot and you're going to draw a table. Forget about the horizon line or all that. I would just, all you need is the first line. So it's like, okay, I have my first line. Now, my second line, I need to rotate it. Okay, there's my second line. And I want it to come towards me. Okay, I'm going to rotate that line. Already, this is feeling better than what most people will naturally gravitate to, which is doing something like this. So see how that top one is feeling more cinematic or more dynamic? Okay, so let's keep rotating. And even these table chairs, the legs, they would even continue this rotation. Get this out of the way. I'm going to draw a little off screen here. So if these lines are rotated, I want to continue that feel, right? And continue this rotation. Do that. So something like that. Now, if I'm going to put a sheet of paper on this table, and again, now that I have something to work with, I can draw onto the floor with that kind of perspective, and I could actually find out where my horizon line is, because if I just continue at that same rate, my horizon line gets flat right about there. And what I did is I just swung, and I'm probably going to have a point right there. And if I wanted to, if this wasn't a storyboard, I could go ahead and, get a ruler out and, check this. But I usually don't have time for doing that because I'm going to quickly add lots of objects to this room. So for instance, I'm going to add, let's say I'm going to add a sheet of paper or a computer screen to this desk. I don't want everything to be in the same perspective. I don't want to add, a piece of paper that has the same perspective and a phone that has the same perspective, because that's going to be boring, right? And when you look around your desk, things are not oriented that way. So again, let's throw some cool stuff. Well, cool stuff. Let's throw a sheet of paper on here. So I'm just going to give it a different perspective. So I've tilted this line away from that line, but it's still got to, now this has still got to feel like it's, what would it do if it rotated up into here? So it's still going to have rotation to it. So that's why you just get used to drawing with rotating lines. And this one, because I tilted it that way, if this is this way, this is going to be just slightly more that, but it's still going to have a subtle rotation, How would that rotate up and become flat? So now this piece of paper, it feels like it's on that desk, but it doesn't feel like it's, in the same perspective. Let's throw in like a computer monitor. And I'm going to give it a perspective like this. So again, if I want, I could find that point, but I could just kind of get a sense of how does this rotate. And now I have something, and let's just throw in another thing. Now this computer monitor feels like it's on the desk, but it has a different rotation. And this part of it's going to go much further over that way and still have a feeling of perspective to it. So now we're starting to be able to fill, your shot with stuff. Now let's get into talking about people. Boxes are great. The only problem with a box, and this is especially for a figure, is it works great in a 3/4 pose. And again, getting used to that rotational feeling of this drawing. And we've all seen people draw the figure where, out of boxes, right? That's maybe the rib cage and then the pelvis. And it's nice because it just gives you a side and a front plane. The problem for me that I encountered when I did this is, okay, that's great for 3/4 poses. What happens when you turn a box towards you? What does this become? It flattens it out because now I can't see those planes, and this is just flat. And to me, this is like really useless. It's really painful to try to. You start only drawing things in 3/4 poses because the second they start facing you, you're stuck. Or you go back to only using a round shape for the rib cage because a round shape and a round shape for the pelvis, because you go, oh, okay, I can see this stuff. I can start seeing some planes. So what I like to do is to take this box and just pretend like you're inflating it with air and that you're going to blow it up. So you're going to add just a little bit of curvature to it. you know, just slapping, basically slapping on, you know, a little bit around us. And what happens when this box is now facing me? It's got a little bit around us. But now this part, I can see now I've got these side planes, this front plane, and this back plane, because these are curving around. And to me, this works a lot better versus the flat kind of boxy shape. And the round shape works great, but a lot of times when I start getting into more extreme perspectives, like let's say, again, learning to kind of rotate things, let's just do a simple girl. So again, kind of looking at what is her rib cage, and then kind of squaring off, but with a kind of a roundish way, and then looking at the center line. Now this and again, these lines should rotate as well. And I get in the top plane of the shoulder. The big ones that I use for shortening and perspective is I look at that angle and these and this. That's why I was less concerned about squaring this off like that. To me, is not as big of a deal. But getting this side plane now, and when I get into the legs, I only need to worry about drawing one leg first. So if I draw this leg down, and again, kind of thinking of it like a square, and getting kind of where this knee goes. And kind of getting a feeling of this. And just a feeling of this foot. And again, just continuing this rotation. Now, if I have this one leg, I automatically know where the other foot is going to end. Or at least, okay, where's this line going to be? Well, it's going to follow this perspective. Where's the knee going to be? It's going to be there. That means, look how short this gets. This is this long from here to here. But this one is only this long. And then this one that goes back is going to go back. And I could even draw through if I want. And the bottom of the knee is going to be a little bit lower. And that top of that ankle is going to be right there. And the back of that foot so see how I got one leg and it automatically told me where my other leg was. And I could do the same thing for the arms. So let's say I know that my arm kind of, the joint kind of will stop here, and the wrist will be around there, or right around the crotch area. And this elbow area will be right around this area. So that means that this arm is going to be here, and again, following that line, this wrist is going to be there, and that hand's going to be there. So see how this rotating idea is helping you to get that nice perspective and using those boxy shapes. So, I mean, this is a very kind of simple standard pose. Let's see what happens when we start just messing around with this stuff. So let's say we have kind of a rib cage. Now this is what I was talking about, kind of squaring off, but having it be a little bit around. In this case, in some cases, you'll actually see a little bit of the back, and I'm just going to draw the body, not worry as much about the head. In some cases, you'll see a little bit of the back of the rib cage, and you'll also be seeing a little bit of the front. And if you've ever wondered, well, how the heck is that happening? It's because you just round off that box shape. And even making the neck kind of boxy in this case. And again, if I've got this top part of the buttocks, I like also finding my center lines. So this would be, I'll do that in a different color so you can see it clearly. This would be the center line here. And if I wanted to add arms here and legs, I could think about how does this leg go down, and maybe even thinking about the top and the side plane of that, and how does this side plane meet this? Maybe this little hint of plane here, you're actually going to see a little bit of front there and top versus side and bottom. And let me color that in so you could really see that clearly. So I'll make this front part green so you can really see that. Versus the back part. I'll make it pink. And then you have this side plane, which I should make a color to just so it's really clear. How about that? Blue. So to me, that's why I kind of like using this slightly rounded boxy shape when I'm thinking about perspective. And in this case, you can get your perspective before you've even worried about things like anatomy, which is really nice. Like you could just think of your big kind of blocky shapes. What are your big blocky shapes? Like an arm and a shoulder or something like that. And maybe this leg, maybe this one is going to push up and go back. And again, getting this back plane versus, I guess this would be the inside plane. And in this case, maybe you would even start to see a hint of the front here, this green plane. You may not, but just to kind of overstate the idea, you know, a hint of that. And what that does is this really helps you to start thinking about getting around this form, because I know you're thinking about here and then going around it. So it starts really becoming a more dimensional kind of an object. And let's think about, okay, this shoulder area. It can be very complicated. For me, I tend to think about, let's do another. Rib cage, neck. And let's start adding some twisting. Again, I like to get that nice center line in there. Now, some of you may be watching this and asking yourself, if I actually draw like this, do I draw these boxes? And occasionally I will if I get stuck. Like if I have a really hard perspective, occasionally I will draw in that little line. Oops. For like, especially this rib line. Sometimes if you look at my rough sketches, you'll see that kind of drawn in there. And here even, like, I'm getting a little hint of this starting to show here, because this is a curved surface. And maybe even on the side of that neck, but maybe this one's, you know, right at that corner. Okay, so like I was going to talk about the arms. I like to think about the arms as the fact that this clavicle and the bone and the scapula pull the arm away. So I'm thinking of this one coming towards me and this going away. So usually what I like to think about is, you know, where's kind of the start of your arm bone? And I will usually get that. And then I just think of this fleshy mass. You know, if this is coming towards me. Like that. And wrapping around and going that way. So I can think about the fact that this has kind of a bottom, a top, and a side, and this has kind of a bottom, a top, and a side. So that being said, I would probably pull this arm. The arm is reaching forward. Just worry about that first. And I could swing a line up again from the ribcage to figure out the distance. And come across perspective-wise to this one. And let's say this one's doing that. And these, this pose doesn't really make any sense. It's just purely to show off the perspective. Another thing too is for extreme foreshortening, sometimes I'll find one end of something and then the other end of it versus, and again, I like finding kind of what is this? You know. So the front of the chest is kind of the equivalent to the front of the bicep for me. And so you wouldn't actually see that. You would see the back on this side, which is this part. And on this leg, this continues on as being like the front. But then you also have, I'm going to use another color. Yellow. Well, no, I guess we're using blue for the inside here. The bottom of this and that. In the inside. Versus now you're starting to see maybe a little bit of the back. And in this case, if this is on the front, this is on the side. And this is also the inside. So that's how I'll start kind of getting these things to feel like they're in this perspective. And so for instance, if I know that the end of this bone is facing that way, my elbow is going to connect me to my wrist bone versus this bone. If I know that, I kind of use this cylinder of the end of this bone to help me figure out this angle. And I know like this back shape is the one my tricep's going to be on. back is my tricep. The blue is the side. The arms get complicated because they twist. And I usually think of it all the way to the hand as that side plane. This would be the front plane. So now I'm kind of creating a dimensional shape. And just, I want to create a real simple, how do I just get from here to there? Just a real simple shape. And same thing, how do I get from there to there? So now I'm building out a little bit more. And I'm building in volumes, and this is helping me to think more in my perspective. So that side plane is kind of going that way. Now that I've kind of started building these geometries and these shapes, then I start worrying more about the perspective. I mean, not the perspective, sorry, the anatomy. So I would maybe think about, okay, what's happening here with the clavicle? Maybe even, would I be able to see this clavicle from here? You know? And then the end of my scapula. And usually I'll just simplify this. Just think of it as a real simple shape. But once I have that, I can build. Usually I like to think of the anatomy. I like to worry about the contour first. So I want to think about, what is the shoulder? And I know the shoulder is probably going to end up on this front towards the side plane. And what is that compared to the tricep? And I'm building rhythms. I'm going shoulder, tricep, and bicep. So shoulder, tricep, bicep, into that elbow. And now I once I've kind of got this shape down, I can think about, okay, well, what is my shoulder actually doing? You know, and it's got kind of a top plane there and a side plane there. And what is my tricep actually doing? Connecting. It's rotating this way. And then my bicep, this muscle. All that inside of there. And then this back muscle and the fat of it, and how that wraps around and connects into here. and how these anatomical parts, this chest muscle resting on top of that, this rib cage. How this neck muscle kind of wraps around. And all of that stuff on top. But I want to get that nice base down first before I start messing with all that stuff. Cool. Let's see. So that being said, I typically draw in a more cartoonier style. So I will kind of just show how I tend to actually use this information. Let's say I'm going to draw a girl, and you know what? I tend to draw a couple of poses, so I'll just get started. And I probably took too much time with the head because I don't even know if I'm going to like this pose. Yeah, so let me lighten it back a little bit. I tend to kind of play with my poses for a while. I find them more so than so I will sometimes for perspective. Let's see if she's holding. She has this little weapon. And if I want to do maybe some perspective to get myself down to that floor plane. So now my feet are on the floor. Again, using that. But even something like this, I'm thinking about the fact that these are and again, I tend to kind of find the pose. Maybe she's holding her weapon. So that's a pretty simple pose, but you can kind of see how I'm just loosely, quickly using some of those things. But let's say she's gonna do something a bit more drastic, some more foreshortening and twisting. Let's do this is kind of the back of her. And just thinking about the gesture and getting some twisting in here. And maybe some this knee here. So again, even in this, I'm thinking about the fact that this would roll there, and then maybe this would actually, I might see some of the back of that. And then, for instance, on this, I might come in here and start thinking about things like, okay, what is the shape? I mean, what is the directionality of that head? I like to create sometimes as long of a line as I can across multiple forms. I think if you have the contour change at every single change in form, it looks odd. For instance, like this one here goes from there, but it goes across from the rib cage across here. Or this one this one's broken up to 3, but this one's like one line. Thinking about, so this is like an extreme kind of a down shot like that. So I'm thinking about the fact that this is the top of the leg and that's the side. And then this is like the front. And again, getting that 3-prong kind of thinking. And even thinking about, okay, this is the side of the figure. Maybe even giving it a little bit. There. You know, like that. So I'm kind of getting that sense for myself, even in a quick sketch. I'm trying to get that sense for myself of, you know, what's the side of this thing? What is the top of it? And then what is the front? So seeing a little bit of the front of that leg, maybe even a hint of it there. Seeing a little hint of the back of that there. Cool. Hope that was helpful.